Welcome back to part 2 of the FPS series tutorial that I'm doing. This time we're going to add the shooting mechanics to the player. So let's go ahead and open up the AC underscore character inside of our blueprints player folder. And last time we left off, we added the movement ability to jump, and some camera lag and weapon sway. So today, let's go ahead and go to project settings, add action mappings, and we are going to add the fire weapon input. We'll click on the select key value, left click, and it will automatically choose left mouse button. And if we go back to the player, right click, and type fire weapon, the input that we just made, it will allow us to put this node in. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our code is scalable right off the bat. So that means fire rate, weapon spread, all the stuff that people expect to see in games, or things that will allow you to make interesting variations of weapons. So to do that, we need to make a function, and we need to be able to call that function whether it be at different times with different variables. So we're going to go ahead and set that up. So we will start by creating a function, hover over the function and the plus icon, and we will create a fire, we'll just call it fire function. And in this function, what we need to do is, for starters, we're going to do a line trace, also called ray casting. And we're going to do that line trace, and that will simulate our bullet for now. So off this, we want to type line trace, and we'll use a line trace by channel. So for those of you that don't know, to do a line trace by channel, it requires a start point and an end point. There's several different ways you can do this. The most common is to fire a weapon straight from the camera forward. That's very classic. A lot of old shooters do that. A lot of new shooters nowadays will fire it from the muzzle of the weapon. And it's really just how you want your game to play. So for this instance, we're actually going to fire it from the socket of the weapon, just so you can visualize it. So what we want to do is we want to start by pulling off our weapon. So this is what we're going to get as a reference. So we're going to get socket location, and in this weapon there are different sockets. So I provided in the project files the SMG here, and in the last video I showed off that it had pre-placed sockets, muzzle, HUD, and eject. We're going to use this muzzle socket, so we need to know the name of it. It's muzzle with a capital M, and we're going to type that into this in socket location that we want. So we're going to search for the muzzle location, and we're going to drag that into the start position, because that's where we want the bullet to fire from. Now we need to know the end location, and to do that, what we want to do is we want to get straight in front of us, as far as we can, the center of the screen. To do that, we pull off the cinematic camera. So this is our camera that we use. We pull off the camera, and what we want to do is we want to get the world rotation. So the reason we get the rotation is it allows us to check which way the camera is facing, and we can utilize that to also do the weapon spread by adding or subtracting float values to that. So let's get the world rotation, and then we can get forward vector. Now I could just plug this straight in if I wanted to. However, what we want to do is we want to add that ability to create the weapon spread. So I'm going to right click and disconnect break all pin links, and I'm going to right click and split structure pen. So I'll right click on both of these, split structure pen, and this is how we are going to add the variation. So we do not need the roll. We only want to get the up and down and the left and right values of the spread. So we can go ahead and plug in the X. Let's drag this over so we have some more room. Now, after we have plugged in the X, we want to add a float. So drag off, hit the Shift plus, and then type float. So float plus float, and we can go ahead and input that y into the y. Now here, we could just add the 1 value, but this will make the spread always go forward and then up 1 degree on the integer. We don't want that. What we want to do is we want to drag off and get the random float in range. This allows us to choose 2 values, and this node will choose a random number in between those values. So for starters, we can do, let's just do -5 and 5. And we want to go ahead and copy both of these, and we want to plug that into the Z. The reason that we don't just plug this into here as well is because each time this node is ran, it's going to choose a value. And if we choose the same value for both of these, the weapon will always shoot in the same area, either the top left, top right. It'll always be, 4 units in X and Y, or 4 units in negative X and Y. But we want variation between the up and down and left and right. So we use 2 separate float ranges. Now we get that, and what we want to do is we actually want to multiply this. So if we take a vector by a float, we can multiply it by a distance. So let's do 100,000. So we do 100,000, 100,000. And we could just plug this into the end. However, you'll see that it doesn't work. What we need to do is we actually need to get the start point plus all of this, and then that gets plugged into the end value. So we want to drag off of the socket location, because that's our starting location. We want to add this vector to it, and we can plug this into the end value. So let me clean this up a little bit, shimmy this over, and this will give us a random point. So let's go ahead and we'll go to the graph, and off the fire weapon we will add the fire function. So anytime I press the fire button, it will cast a line trace. So let's go ahead and test that out and see what we get. Before we do that, we need to make sure that in the line trace by channel node we made, we want to make sure that the draw debug type is set to duration. Otherwise, we will not be able to see the line that we have created. So let's set it to 1 and hit play, and you see that it cast a line. Now if I continue to spam this, you'll see that it has now created a type of spread. It is very, very exaggerated right now because I plugged in relatively high values. So, but this is proof that the spread does work, and we can continue to click and we can continue to fire. So let's refine this a little bit. So how do we refine this? One, we're going to want different spread values per weapon. So what we can actually do is, if we drag off of this float value, we can promote to variable. And what this will be is it will be weapon spread. So this weapon spread, we can do, we'll set this to a value of 3. And we want to plug the positive numbers into the max value, the highest number it can go to. We want to plug negative numbers into the minimum values. So to do that, we'll drag off the float and we will multiply it by -1. And we can drag that into these. Now what this does, let's go ahead and make it easy to read. What this does is it will take our spread value. So let's say we want a maximum spread of 3 or a maximum spread of 7. It will take that and it will multiply by 1 for the negative, so -7 or -3, and then the max is +3. And it will just return a random value for each of that. So now if we go and we test, you'll see The spread is a little tighter because I did change the value to 3 instead of 5, but it's still giving us the positive and negative values for this. Awesome. So that is our semi-fire. Now we know that a lot of games and a lot of weapons need to be automatic fire. So how do we do automatic fire? Well, instead of pressing once and firing this event once, we want to be able to loop this event. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. The way I'm going to show you might not be best practice all around, but it works very well for this specific situation. So what we're going to do is we are going to, let's create a macro. So macros are very similar to functions. I'll spare you the details going on about macros, but the big reason we want to use a macro here is because macros will allow delays inside of the macro. Again, not best practices, but works for this situation. So we'll create a macro, and we will call this weapon fire. In the weapon fire, or in a macro, you'll see that it has an input and an output node. Right now, you can't plug anything into either one, so what we need to do is we need to go to the top right, to the input section, hit the plus icon, and change this parameter that it gives us to an execute pin. And we will just name this exec for execute. So off of this execute, we want to type in our fire function. We can also drag it in from the left bar. So we'll drag this in, and we need to be able to loop this. So what we'll do is we'll drag off and we'll hit delay. And on this delay, we'll leave it at 0.2 for now. But we also need to make sure that the weapon is still firing. So we need to do a Boolean check to make sure that I've actually have the trigger pressed to continue to fire it. So what we'll do is we'll drag off into a branch. If the trigger is still held, so we'll drag off condition, type in promote to variable, and we'll name this is trigger pressed. It's always good to use camel case just so that your variables are readable. I know it's not C++, but it's still handy to get into the habit of using camel case. So is trigger pressed? If it is true, we want to reroute this node, and we want to go all the way back to the fire node. So if your trigger is pressed, we want to fire again. So let's go ahead and drag this over to the fire button. And we'll go back to the event graph. And we will do, instead of this fire node here, this fire function we made because we already used it, we will delete this and we will drag off of the macro weapon fire. So let's go ahead and press here. Now we made that node earlier called is trigger pressed. Well, what we need to do is we need to check, or we need to be able to set that. So we'll drag off of the Boolean and choose set is trigger pressed. Make sure this goes into the execute. Now if I press this button, trigger is pressed. If I release it, we want to set it to be false, so the trigger is no longer pressed. So, just so we read through this, I press the button, I set my value to confirm that my trigger is pressed, and then I run this macro, and inside of this macro, it fires once, has a delay, and then after that delay, if the trigger button is still held down, it will loop back into the fire button. So what we can do is we will drag off this duration, promote to variable, and we will name this time between shots. And time between shots is going to be our fire rate. How long in between one bullet and the next bullet? How much time happens before I can fire again? So we'll turn that down to 0.1. Compile, save, and let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So now you can see it's pretty fast. but I'm just holding down the button once and it's firing. So now we've got our fire working, we've got our automatic fire. Now there is going to be situations where, let's say you have a sniper rifle and you shoot it, but you want it to take a while before it shoots again. Let me show you what will happen now. So let's go back to our weapon fire. Let's change the time between shots. So let's make it 3 seconds. So it's going to take 3 seconds for me to be able to shoot my next shot. So if I hold the button down, 3 seconds, boom, it fires again. That's only if I hold the button down. If I spam my left click, you'll see that I can actually still fire quicker than what I actually want the weapon to fire. So what we need to do is we need to add one more check before every time we fire the weapon, we need to check to see if I am still in between my shots. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make another Boolean variable. So we'll go to the Variables tab in the Details panel, left click, and we will name this is between shots ? So let's go into our macro, and whenever we fire the weapon, we need to set that we are between shots. So in between the execute and the fire, we'll say, yes, I am in between my shots. Now, we also need to turn it off to check that I am no longer between my shots. So to do that, we need to move all this over, and right after the delay, so my fire rate has finished, I can now shoot again. I want to set between shots to be false. So it's just a very, very quick addition, and now I can check that I have fired the weapon, and I need to wait until this completes. Now I can shoot again. So let's go in here, and I will spam. Oh, pardon me. I need to check. I forgot I needed to check. So let's do one more check. We'll do a branch. Am I between shots? If I'm not between shots, then I want to fire. If I am between shots, I cannot fire. So let's go ahead and test map, and boom. I am spamming left click, and now it waits. Awesome. All right, now let's adjust that variable again. So time between shots, we can bump down to 0.15. Let's do 0.15. Awesome. Now I can auto fire, and I can't left click faster than the auto fire now. So it's a nice fail safe. Awesome. So we've got firing, and it looks kind of bland. You know, we can fire, but it doesn't really feel like we're firing. So what we want to do is we actually want to add a little bit of camera shake. So let's go back to the content browser. Let's go to the blueprints folder, and we will right click and we'll create a new folder, and we will call this camera shakes. I'm making a new folder because we might want a camera shake for each new kind of weapon or each weapon itself. So we might have a bunch in here. So we'll right click, we'll go to blueprint class, and under all classes, we want to type in camera shake. If I could spell. So matinee camera shake is what we want to look for. So select, and we will type in camera shake. So CS underscore, let's do submachine. We'll do SMG. CS underscore SMG. CS stands for camera shake underscore SMG. So drag this in, and you'll see up in the top right, we've got oscillation. So we've got our duration, our blend time, and our out time. Our duration is how long this is going to play. So let's do 0.1, and let's open all of our locations. So inside of each drop down, you'll see even more drop downs. So what we want to do is we want to use the rotation oscillation. So we'll pitch it up and down. So our amplitude and our frequency. Our frequency is how often it's going to happen. Let's do 2. And then our amplitude, we're going to go crazy just to show you an example of it. So we'll do 20. So 20 degrees of amplitude. And then our initial offset, we actually want to be 0. So if it was random, what we could do is each time the camera shake plays, it will start from a different location and pitch 20 more degrees past that location. You can get really, really crazy with it. We don't want that. We want the camera to always reset. So initial offset 0. And we'll keep it at sine wave because it's very consistent. So we'll start with this amplitude, and what we want to do is inside of our fire event, we actually want to do our camera shake. So play world camera shake. It is important to note that if you decide to try and make a multiplayer situation out of this, this might not be the best node, because this will play camera shake for everyone, not just the person using this. However, because we're just doing a single player instance right now, we can do this. So under shake, we want to look for our shake class, and we will use CS_SMG, the one we just made. And the epicenter will be get actor location. So we want to get our own actor location, the player, because we're doing this in the player, and we want to use that as the epicenter for this world shake. And the inner radius, we do need to bump this up just a little bit. So let's do 50 and 50. Save it, and let's try it out. Okay, so nothing played here. So what is the issue here? What have we done wrong? If we open up the CS_SMG that we made, maybe the duration time is not enough. So let's bump the duration to 0.5. We'll do 1. We'll bump it up to 1. And just for good measure, we'll also add 5, frequency 5. And we'll just keep random on the yaw, because it going left and right, that's okay. So let's also change this. We'll do actor location. We will actually get our camera location. Boom, get world location. I'll make that the epicenter. We'll bump these up for good measure as well. 100. Oh, there we go. Okay. So you'll see I press once and it goes up. So I did input crazy values, but it's a great example so you can see what's going on. So let's go back into our camera shake SMG blueprint we made, and let's drop all these values down again. So our amplitude on the pitch was way too high. So let's do 2. And then our yaw, we can do 1, and let's see what happens. So it's working, but it's taking a long time to do it, and that's because our duration is really high. So let's bump this down to 0.15, and our blend out time, these two values, the blend in and blend out time, add up to 0.3, which is higher than our oscillation duration. So let's do 0.05, and our blend out time 0.1. Let's go ahead and save that, and we can drop the frequency of this to 1, and we'll test it out. Awesome. So you'll see now that the camera is shaking kind of horizontally. We want to drop that in just a little bit. I'll go ahead and skip past this I'm just going to tweak my values, and I'll show you the values I get in the end. All right, so these are the values that I have come up with. So for pitch, amplitude is 2, frequency is 1, the initial offset is 0, and it's a sine wave. You can go ahead and pause the screen if you want to go through all of them. The biggest important one will be the location oscillation. The X value, the amplitude is 50, the frequency is 1, and the initial offset is 0. So that is the most important one, and I'll show you what it looks like. So if we full screen, we can see that there's a bit of, it looks like a bit of kick in the weapon. So we basically have faked a bit of recoil and feedback from the weapon. It still is a bit lacking due to there not being any sound or upwards movement on the gun itself, but for a very rough implementation, we're getting somewhere. So yeah, this is firing the weapon. I think this is a solid place. So in the next video, we will go over reloading and magazine reserves, and in the next one will also show the ammo counter. So thank you guys, and see you in the next one.